Hecklers chant "We love Trump." After GOP presidential hopeful Nikki Haley's CPAC speech. When former U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley announced in February that she would challenge Donald Trump for the Republican nomination in the 2024 election campaign, the ex-president welcomed her decision, saying, "The more the merrier," and that she should not be bound by her previous promises not to run against him. Nikki Haley, 51, plastered a smile on her face and took selfies with supporters after her Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, speech on Friday, but there was no ignoring the jeers and chants of "We love Trump." Supporters of the ex-president thronged the hall of Trump's stomping grounds as the former South Carolina governor wrapped up her speech. Delivered to what appeared to be a far from packed audience of conservatives, judging by footage posted on social media, the Republican presidential candidate's words were given a warm enough welcome, as she aimed to pitch herself to the CPAC crowd as the face of a new generation. Haley's speech was peppered with jabs at 80-year-old President Joe Biden, as she urged a mental competency test for all politicians over 75 years old. Incidentally, this would potentially also apply to 76-year-old Donald Trump. She also weighed in on the fact that Republicans had ceded the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, saying, "Our cause is right, but we have failed to win the confidence of a majority of Americans. That ends now. If you're tired of losing, put your trust in a new generation." She pledged to renew an America that's strong and proud, not weak and woke. Haley juggled the terms, woman, minority, and immigrant as part of her pitch to the crowd, finally eliciting some loud applause when she described herself as the first minority female governor in history, and exclaimed that, "America is not a racist country." In case you didn't notice, the liberal media's heads are exploding about my run for president. We all know why. The media can't stand that I'm a conservative. Think about it. I'm a woman, a minority, and the daughter of immigrants. I am proof that liberals are wrong about everything they say about America. More the merrier. Trump says he's glad ex-UN Nikki Haley is running for president. The ex-UN ambassador under Trump announced her 2024 presidential bid on February 14, and is regarded as a major competitor to challenge the 45th POTUS for the Republican nomination. Nikki Haley has already laid out some of her key campaign points. Among them are that U.S. businesses must hire Americans and not illegal immigrants, implement term limits for Congress, require mandatory mental competency tests for U.S. politicians over 75 years old, increase domestic energy production, etc. However, ever since she tossed the proverbial hat in the ring, Haley has trodden carefully, avoiding any mention of Trump by name. In a recent interview on the podcast Honestly, she pledged to support him if he secured the GOP nomination. Meanwhile, a late February survey by a U.S. media outlet indicated that more than 40% of respondents would support the candidacy of Donald Trump in the 2024 GOP primaries, aimed at determining the Republicans' presidential candidate. Trump is followed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who was backed by 28% of potential voters and has yet to announce a potential presidential bid. Nikki Haley and former Vice President Mike Pence got 7% each, while Texas Governor Greg Abbott and House Republican Liz Cheney stood at 2% each. News scare unlocked, internet spooked as Florida man dies of brain-eating amoeba. An alert warning residents about the Naegleria fowleri infection was issued by the Florida Department of Health in Charlotte County in February, after it confirmed one case of infection with the microscopic single-celled living amoeba. A man in Charlotte County, Florida, has died after being infected with brain-eating amoeba Naegleria fowleri, a news release from the Florida Department of Health in Charlotte County confirmed. An epidemiological investigation is being conducted to understand the unique circumstances of this infection. I can confirm the infection unfortunately resulted in a death, and any additional information on this case is confidential to protect patient privacy, Jay Williams, press secretary for the Florida Department of Health, told the press. It was added that the case, which was confirmed back in late February, could have resulted from sinus rinse practices utilizing tap water. Officials yet again strongly advised residents to use special sinus solutions based on distilled or sterile water, and explained the need for boiling tap water for at least 1 minute and then being cooled before sinus rinsing. To allay apprehensions, J. Williams added, "Infection with Naegleria fowleri is rare and can only happen when water contaminated with Amoeba enters the body through the nose. You cannot be infected by drinking tap water. All you need to know about brain-eating amoeba as first death confirmed in South Korea. Naegleria fowleri, known as the brain-eating amoeba, is a single-cell organism particularly tailored to inhabiting warm fresh water and soil. Its preferred habitat, where it enjoys its highest reproductive rate, is a warm freshwater environment, such as lakes, rivers, and geothermal hot springs. The unicellular organism can also live in damp soil. In the case of human infections, the thermophilic amoeba travels up through the nose via the nasal mucosa during water activities, especially involving diving. This can also happen when people cleanse their sinuses using contaminated water. As the amoeba travels up the nose to the brain and spinal cord, it devours erythrocytes, also called red blood cells, and nerve cells, triggering inflammation and destruction of the brain tissue. The result is a rare and very severe disease called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, PAM. The disease cannot be spread by people via human contact. News of the Florida death triggered a swift reaction on the internet, with many resorting to dark humor, commenting that a new fear was unlocked, in reference to the coronavirus pandemic scare that has gripped the world for the past 3 years. Many also drew parallels with The Last of Us, an action-adventure survival horror game franchise set in a post-apocalyptic US. West may be deliberately concealing findings of probes into Nord Stream blasts, says French general. American investigative journalist Seymour Hersh wrote a bombshell article in February, claiming that the US and Norway were behind the bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines last September. Western officials dismissed Hersh's reporting on the sabotage operation, while Russia vowed it would not let the Nord Stream probe be swept under the rug. The West may be purposefully suppressing the findings of investigations into the Nord Stream blasts, General Dominique Trinquant, former head of the French military mission at the United Nations, has stated. The mere fact that there have been no conclusions presented from 3 Western investigations into the explosions at the Nord Stream 1 and 2 natural gas infrastructure may evidence that their findings have been swept under the rug, the general said during a TV interview. We do not have all the information in hand. What I find amazing is that German, Swedish, Danish investigations have already collected a lot of information, yet there have still been no conclusions. So one might surmise that there are conclusions they simply do not want to make public, Trinquant stated in a video of the interview, posted on YouTube. The military expert in geostrategy believed that the principal question that should be asked is, who benefited from this crime? The fact that the gas pipeline belongs to a Russian company shows a priori that Russia would not benefit from the explosion, the general said. At the same time, Trinquant expressed confidence in the high-quality and detailed investigation carried out by U.S. investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. In his February article, Hersh accused the United States leadership of orchestrating the destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 natural gas pipelines in late September 2022. Citing sources familiar with the planning of this operation, Hersh claimed that U.S. Navy divers planted explosive charges on the pipelines during summer 2022 under the cover of a NATO military exercise in the Baltic Sea. The explosives were then reportedly detonated remotely 3 months later so as to avoid casting suspicion on the perpetrators. S.Y. Hersh on U.S. proxy war on Russia, Snowden's expose and Nord Stream sabotage. Referencing these bombshell revelations, General Dominique Trinquant said the version of events put forward by Hersh was credible. I believe the version presented is absolutely trustworthy. This is not merely reliable but also checked. Everyone can do this at present, the general noted. pointing to the current widespread opportunities for tracking aircraft and marine vessels. If Russia had been involved in the blasts, as some claimed, then Germany, Denmark and Sweden would have definitely found that out during their investigations, the expert said, adding that since this has not been proven, there is a need to search in a different direction. How's false flags record prompts public to trust Hersh's Nord Stream bombshell even more. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 natural gas infrastructure was built by Russian and European energy companies to carry up to 110 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually from Russia to Europe via pipelines along the bottom of the Baltic Sea. On September 26, 2022, sections of pipelines off the Danish island of Bornholm were struck in a coordinated terror attack. A month after the incident, Russian officials accused the Anglo-Saxons of responsibility. When Seymour Hersh wrote about the sabotage operation in great detail in his article, Western officials dismissed the reporting as false, while mainstream media either cast aside the story, or attempted to smear the investigative journalist himself. Russia, however, has no intention of allowing the Western countries to just sweep the investigation under the rug, as Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recently stated at a press conference following the meeting of the G20 foreign ministers in New Delhi, India. Russian Deputy UN Envoy renames US, UK after Biden's Spox calls Russia a People's Republic of Russia. Biden Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has a reputation for putting her foot in her mouth. At a press conference on Friday, she announced that President Biden and European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen would be discussing ways to address the challenges posed by the People's Republic of Russia. Russian First Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations Dmitry Polyansky did a bit of light trolling of Biden's press secretary over her new name for the Russian Federation. Coming up with a couple alternative names for the United States and the United Kingdom, it must be a foe of United American Emirates and the British Confederation. Polyansky tweeted, responding to a clipped video featuring Jean-Pierre's flub. The Russian diplomat wasn't the only one to notice the new name for the Eurasian nation. I guess the two countries merged when nobody was looking, one person quipped, implying the People's Republic of Russia may be a reference to Russia and China. The woman is a prophet. The People's Republic of Russia is acquiring contours in the world's imagination, another joked. The People's Republic of Russia has already happened. It beat them to launching satellites and people to space. It beat them at the Olympics, another chimed in, perhaps referring to the Soviet Union, officially known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Maybe she's seen the future, another person wrote. Diversity at a cost of qualifications, another suggested, most likely referring to the Biden administration's constant reminders that Jean-Pierre is the first black, first openly gay, child of immigrants press secretary. Biden stumbles and falls while boarding Air Force One. Russia, officially the Russian Federation, emerged on the world stage in December 1991, after the leaders of the Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian republics of the USSR met to dissolve the Soviet Union. Before that, it was called the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. The Federation part of Russia's name signals its status as an agglomeration of 89 federal subjects, including oblasts, autonomous republics, and districts, and major cities that function as regions. There was never a country called the People's Republic of Russia. However, a Russian People's Republic and a Russian National People's Republic have popped up in online fantasy role-playing games. China boosting defense budget to respond to changing security situation. China is increasing its defense budget to meet complex security challenges and fulfill the country's obligations, Wang Chao, a spokesman for the first session of the 14th National People's Congress, said on Saturday. The increase in defense spending is driven both by the need to respond to complex security challenges and the need to fulfill the obligations of a large country, Wang told reporters. The spokesman added that the scale of the military spending was also determined by the basic needs of defense construction and the level of development of the national economy. U.S. Army Logistics Chief says potential war with China likely precision munitions fight. At the same time, Wang refused to specify how much China would increase its defense spending in 2023, though adding that all the details would be set in the country's draft budget expected to be published on Sunday. The spokesman noted that the share of China's defense budget as a percentage of the country's GDP had remained largely stable and below global average figures for many years. The growth rate is relatively moderate and reasonable, Wang added. He also said that the modernization of China's armed forces would not pose a threat to any country, but on the contrary, it will become a positive force for maintaining stability and peace in the region and around the world. China steadily increases its defense budget every year, although Beijing adheres to the defensive nature of its military doctrine and does not participate in wars or military conflicts. In 2022, China planned to raise its military budget by 7.1% year-on-year to 1.45 trillion yuan, $209.9 billion. Why is the COVID-19 lab leak theory back in the headlines? The US is reviving the pandemic blame game as a countermeasure to China's public opinion offensive. For most people in the world, COVID is over. We have successfully moved on. We don't let it worry us anymore or undermine our lives, and the harshest restrictions, apart from a few places, are firmly a thing of the past. However, there's one lingering aftermath of the pandemic which refuses to go away, and that's the political blame game. Over the past few days, the US government has again been cultivating the lab leak conspiracy theory, claiming that the COVID-19 virus originated from a laboratory leak in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The re-emergence of these claims seems random, but it has been coordinated across the administration. First, the US Department of Energy issued a report on the matter. Then US Ambassador to China Nicholas Burns called on Beijing to be more honest about COVID origins, which was followed by FBI Director Christopher Wray making his statement. The question is, why are they doing this? And why now? The answer is, yet again, the US is weaponizing this conspiracy theory in a bid to undermine China publicly. Specifically, the goal is to create a public distraction from several issues China has been focusing on lately. One of those is the chemical disaster plaguing the U.S. state of Ohio after last month's train derailment, and the Biden administration's bungled response to it. The other is China's Ukraine peace plan. For 3 years, the U.S. has used the COVID-19 pandemic as a public opinion weapon against China across a number of areas, openly scapegoating Beijing for the pandemic and its consequences, while also seeking to depict China's response to the pandemic negatively. Examples include framing China as culpable for a cover-up, claiming China is responsible for the worldwide spread of the virus, depicting China's lockdowns as brutal and inhumane, and of course, spreading the laboratory leak theory, which has never been taken seriously by credible biomedical experts. It seemed that by 2023, the dismay and struggle of the COVID-19 pandemic was finally over, as even China forfeited its zero-COVID policy and moved on with life as usual. Not so, says the US as it begins weaponizing the lab leak theory yet again, which is quickly circulated and endorsed by the mainstream media. Ironically, the same media have very little to say about the fallout of the environmental disaster in Ohio, or the credible report that the Nord Stream pipelines were actively sabotaged by the United States. Of course, it is no coincidence that these events are, as it happens, the precise reason for the coordinated re-emergence of the laboratory leak theory. Following the drama and anti-China hysteria promulgated by the recent spy balloon incident, Chinese state media and commentators have hit back at the US by relentlessly criticizing the Ohio disaster, using that as a public opinion offensive of their own. In addition to that, Beijing has tried to influence the direction of the Ukraine war by proposing a peace plan of its own, one which does not support Washington's objectives in the country, calls for compromise, and has subsequently been dismissed by US officials. What does the US do to respond to this? It reignites the lab leak theory to distract the conversation. There's no evidence provided to the public, but the sensational statements by American officials never fail to be amplified by the media, with the result being whipped up public outrage against China. Then the US moves from one anti-China meme to the next. It is because of this constant public opinion manipulation that it has become impossible for Washington and Beijing to normalize and stabilize their ties, which is leading to a vicious circle and becoming inherently dangerous. In conclusion, the concerted re-emergence of this theory is critical evidence of how the US manipulates global discourse and public opinion. In this particular scenario, however, the US is not using the lab leak theory to pursue any specific policy goals, such as manufacturing consent for sanctions, but is doing so as a tit-for-tat distraction against China's focus on the Ohio chemical disaster. Whether this tactic will work is up for debate. The world has had enough of the coveted blame game, and, without some hard evidence, the lab leak theory will never be as effective a narrative tool as it once was.
Chinese peace plan. Can Beijing find a way to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict, despite open hostility from the US and NATO? Moscow and Kiev have conditionally welcomed the intervention, but the latter's chief patrons appear to be bitterly opposed. Throughout the latter half of February, China was increasingly active diplomatically. Its highest-ranking diplomat, the director of the Office of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission of the Chinese Communist Party Wang Yi, made a European tour. After attending the Munich Security Conference, he traveled to Hungary and Russia. In Moscow, he held talks with Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and finally, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Yi assured Putin that China is ready to strengthen strategic cooperation with Russia. He stressed that Russian-Chinese relations are not directed against third countries, and will not yield to outside pressure. The Russian president confirmed that he is looking forward to the state visit of his friend Xi Jinping after the session of the National People's Congress, NPC, of the People's Republic of China, PRC, an event where key government officials will be appointed. According to the Wall Street Journal, this visit may take place in April or at the beginning of May, when Russia celebrates World War II Victory Day. WSJ sources also reported that Beijing wishes to play a greater role in the settlement of the Ukraine conflict, and Xi plans to discuss multilateral peace talks. Soon afterwards, China proposed its peace initiative for the conflict. However, for many observers, Beijing's proposals generate far more questions than answers. The Chinese document. While Yi was touring Europe, China published 2 documents expressing its position on a new global security architecture. On February 21st, the Foreign Ministry released the concept of a global security initiative based on 6 main principles. The document mostly restated Beijing's neutral rhetoric regarding the conflict in Ukraine. For example, the principle of the sovereignty of all countries stands next to that of a serious attitude towards legitimate security concerns. While the first thesis is occasionally interpreted as China's rejection of the Russian offensive in Ukraine, the second point refers to the Western leaders' decision to ignore Moscow's concerns about the expansion of NATO to the east. At the same time, China has particularly stressed that it remains committed to resolving differences and disputes through dialogue and consultations, not wars and sanctions. On February 24th, the anniversary of the Russian offensive in Ukraine, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs published another document, widely referred to in the media as China's peace plan. In fact, Beijing never offered its text, titled China's Position on the Political Settlement of the Ukraine Crisis, as a roadmap. The document contains only vague formulations tinged with an air of philosophy. Here's the outline of the 12 points. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries and the norms of international law. Rejection of the Cold War mentality, including the expansion of military blocs. A ceasefire and an end to hostilities. In war, no one wins. A return to peace negotiations. The settlement of the humanitarian crisis. The protection of civilians and prisoners of war. Ensuring the safety of nuclear power plants. The reduction of strategic risks and prevention of the use of nuclear weapons. The export of food within the grain corridor. An end to unilateral sanctions. Securing the stability of production and supply chains. The involvement of the international community in post-war reconstruction. Too much peace. China's peacemaking proposal didn't spark a positive reaction from all key players. Russia's reception was polite, but tepid. Vladimir Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov said that Moscow will pay great attention to the plan of our Chinese friends, but added that so far it does not see any prerequisites for a return to a peaceful course. He added that the military operation would continue, and Russia is moving towards achieving its goals. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova earlier said that Moscow shares Beijing's core ideas and remains committed to the principles of compliance with international law and indivisible security. Russia is ready to achieve its objectives through political and diplomatic means, but a peace agreement should imply a stop to supplies of Western weapons and mercenaries to Ukraine, the end of hostilities, the return of the country to a neutral non-aligned status, and the recognition of new territorial realities. Beijing's initiative provoked an outburst of criticism against China on behalf of U.S. authorities, who wrongly assessed Moscow's enthusiasm for the proposals. Putin's applauding it, so how could the peace plan be any good? I've seen nothing in the plan that would indicate that there is something that would be beneficial to anyone other than Russia, if the Chinese plan were followed. The idea that China is going to be negotiating the outcome of a war that's a totally unjust war for Ukraine is just not rational, U.S. President Joe Biden said in an interview with ABC. Adding to the rhetoric, Biden's national security advisor Jake Sullivan suggested that Beijing stick to the first point about respecting the sovereignty of all countries. Commenting on China's plan, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg pointed out that Beijing doesn't inspire much trust. He went so far to state that his bloc suspects Chinese weapons may be supplied to Russia, even though there is no such evidence yet. Meanwhile, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said that the EU will study China's document, but only in the light of the friendship between Beijing and Moscow. The President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, spoke out about China's reflections in a more neutral way. Zelensky noted that while he doesn't share all the ideas outlined in Beijing's proposals, some are quite suitable for Ukraine, for example, the support of the territorial integrity of all countries. However, Zelensky stressed that unless China's plan includes a proposal on the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine's territory, it will be unachievable. At the same time, Zelensky said that he also wishes to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Zelensky's advisor, Mikhail Podolyak, reacted more strongly. He indicated that any proposals should include a return to 1991 borders. The head of the President's Servant of the People faction, David Arakamiya, dunbent Beijing's suggestion for both parties to immediately start negotiations unacceptable due to the current realities. Against this background, the position of Poland, one of the closest allies of the US in Europe, came as a surprise. Polish President Andrzej Duda stated that the initiative might become a way towards peace, and that one should not underestimate a great power like China. These words may indicate his desire to maintain beneficial economic ties with Beijing. What China meant. So why did China's peace plan remain so vague, and why did its appeal to the good of mankind provoke such a strong reaction from the West? What we have seen is by no means an action plan or a peacemaking appeal. Rather, it is a declaration of China's position. It is important for the world community to see what China has called for and what it wants. It has been rumored that China wants to supply lethal weapons or otherwise intervene in the conflict. With this document, China has demonstrated that it has different intentions, and it stands on the side of peace, Alexei Maslov, director of the Institute of Asian and African Countries at the Moscow State University, told. According to Maslov, China's proposal is insufficiently radical for the West and is too mild for Russia since it doesn't directly condemn Western actions. But if you closely examine the text, you will see that it includes some anti-Western statements, for example, a call for the non-proliferation of military blocs. We may call this the kind of neutrality that favors Russia, the expert says. Vasily Koshin, director of the Higher School of Economics Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies, agreed that for Russia, the Chinese peace plan is mostly acceptable, but will likely be rejected by the West and Ukraine. At the same time, he believes the document was originally created with a different purpose in mind. China wanted to show everyone that it can come up with good peace proposals which may act as an alternative to the West's bellicose rhetoric. A number of developing countries that remain neutral may support this initiative, the Koshin stated. China's initiatives directly proceed from the foreign policy concepts of the Communist Party and Xi himself, viewing the world as a community involved in shaping the common destiny of mankind. Only uninformed observers could expect China to take a different standpoint, Alexander Lomanov, head of the Center for Asia-Pacific Studies of the IMEMA RAS, told RT. In his opinion, the negative reception that the proposal received from Europeans and Americans are a result of the general tensions between the West and Beijing. China believes that in the future, humanity should solve serious problems together. Xi's initiatives are indisputable. They talk about joint prosperity, the support of production chains, etc. However, in the modern world, which has apparently lost all mutual trust, it remains unclear how all of this can be implemented. Especially in the context of the current confrontation with the West, which sides against Beijing. Are America and its satellites ready to form such a community, based on the Chinese model? No. Even some third-world countries are not ready for it, the expert said. Lomanov added that the West has ignored Russia's concerns about NATO expansion over the past 25 years, and neither will it listen to Beijing's appeal. China is a powerful country, but it can hardly become a broker that all sides of the conflict will trust. For example, the cessation of fire is hardly possible as long as the idea of a military victory over Russia dominates in the West, he explained. The experts added that historically, China has never been a mediator and it is not interested in becoming one in the context of the Ukrainian conflict. According to Koshin, the US suggested that China take on such a role at the start of Russia's military offensive, but their entreaties were refused. We are allowed to, but you're not. At the same time as Beijing delivered the peace initiative, there was increasing talk concerning possible weapons supplies from China to Russia. Sullivan declared that the US sent Beijing a clear warning regarding any such steps. CIA Director William Burns claimed to CBS News that U.S. intelligence has evidence that China is seriously considering the possibility of supplying weapons to Russia, but has not made a final decision yet. Both Beijing and Moscow deny the existence of such plans. Previously, Secretary of State Antony Blinken had asserted that Chinese companies were already helping Russia fight Ukraine by providing non-lethal military assistance and assisting Moscow in avoiding Western economic sanctions.
As Russia was
Some
preparing
Chinese
to host the
organizations
FIFA
have
World
already
Cup,
fallen under
it
U.S.
saw the need
sanctions
to rein
as a
in the
result.
ultras.
For example,
Following the
on
incident
January
in Marseille,
26,
tensions
the U.S.
between
Treasury
football
imposed
fans and
restrictions
the
against
Russian
the TNA
government had
research
mounted,
institution,
as the latter
Chant,
feared the
and its subsidiary
reputational
in
damage to a
Luxembourg for
World Cup
supposedly
host
providing
nation.
the Russian company Teratech
The
with
brawl
images
in
of Ukraine
Marseille
from
had made
satellites
Nikki
equipped with
persona
synthetic
non
aperture
grata
radars,
both in
SAR.
Russia and much of Europe,
Teratech,
so he
in
moved
turn,
to Ukraine in
allegedly transmitted the images to
2017.
PMC Wagner.
In exile.
Consequently, China reacted
In
sharply to the
October of
West's attempt to interfere in its
2017,
policy towards
the
Moscow.
Reconquista Club opened
While
in
in Russia,
Kiev.
Wang Yi said that
Its
Chinese-Russian
name is
relations are
dedicated
rock
to the
solid and will
so-called
withstand any
Ukrainian
test proposed by
Reconquista,
the
a
evolving
movement to
international
promote
situation.
Ukrainian influence
The
in
head of
Europe.
EU diplomacy,
On
Joseph Borrell,
Fridays,
claimed that during
fistfights
an
and other
informal
types of
conversation in
hand-to-hand
Munich,
combat
Wang Yi
were
asked him why
organized at the
Beijing
club.
should not supply weapons to
All
Russia
in
if
all,
the EU
it
supplies
hosted
weapons to
40
Ukraine.
MMA tournaments.
I had to explain the
In
big
May
difference, telling him what a
2018,
big threat the
Robert
war in
Rundo,
Ukraine
the
poses to
founder of
us,
the
Borrell said.
California-based far-right
According to
Rise Above
Romanov,
movement,
this is China's way of showing
fought
its
at the
weariness with the West's
Reconquista.
double standards, and its
A few
dwindling hope
months
in
later,
cooperating with the
Rundo and
European
3 other
Union on
RAM
equal
members
footing.
were arrested in the U.S.
For
for
a long time,
participating in the
China
white
has believed in the
supremacist
strategic
Unite the
autonomy
Right
of
rally
Europe.
in Charlottesville that
But
had
Europe
taken
is
place in
increasingly
August
becoming an
of
appendage of the American policy in
2017.
containing China.
The
That's
FBI
how it
called
was with the
RAM an
sanctions.
extremist
The
group
EU
of white
imposed restrictions
supremacy
because of
and
the
revealed
situation
that
in
Rundo was
Xinjiang,
acquainted
but was
with
very
members of
surprised
the
to face
Azov,
countermeasures.
paramilitary and
And
neo-Nazi
now
group.
Beijing is demonstrating
Rundo
that
did meet
theoretically,
in Kiev
it is
with
able
its
to take symmetrical
representatives,
action
most
regarding the
notably with
situation in
Elena
Ukraine.
Semeniaka, the
However,
International
I think that in
Secretary
the matter
of the
of weapons
National
supplies
Corps,
to Russia, China
a
won't go
political
past
party
rhetoric
that
statements,
emerged from the
Lomanov
Azov
concluded.
battalion. Semeniaka confirmed that Americans had come to sports competitions and were interested in Azov's experience in organizing youth movements. Most of all, Rundo was inspired by Denis Nikitin, the organizer of the MMA fights at the Reconquista. Rondo was so fascinated by Nikaitin that he even got a tattoo with his brand's logo. However, very little is known about Nikaitin's life in Ukraine. It's as if a line splits the man's biography into before and after he left Russia. In 2019, he stopped organizing large sporting events and dropped completely off the radar. Reports of his arrest by security services would circulate now and again, but were never confirmed. In 2022, after the military operation in Ukraine began, Nikaitin suddenly resurfaced in the ranks of the RDK, a unit within Ukraine's armed forces. He spoke in an interview about his motivation: if Russia for Russians is reduced to the size of Moscow, or the Moscow region, or the European part of Russia, I'm okay with that, as a nationalist. This is where I see eye to eye with Ukrainian nationalists. The Nazi diaspora. By the time Nikaitin moved to Ukraine, there was already a large diaspora of far-right Russians in place. Among them was Alexei Levkin, founder of the neo-Nazi organization Vodenzhigand, who had fought in Donbass as part of the Azov battalion. Another Russian citizen, Sergei Korochik, nicknamed Botsman, had also joined the unit. He, too, had fought for Ukraine in Donbass, and personally received his Ukrainian passport from Peter Poroshenko, Ukraine's fifth president. Some investigative journalists also believe Korochik may have been involved in the 2016 murder of journalist Pavel Sheremet in Kiev. Among Nikaitin's contacts in Kiev was Kirill Konakhin, aka Radonsky. In 2018, he moved to Ukraine after charges were pressed against him in Russia. He served in the Azov battalion for a while before becoming a yoga instructor. While his CV says he charges around $1,000 per class, he also posts photos on social media containing weapons and swastikas styled after Hindi ornaments. Additionally, he appeared in photos and videos with Nikaitin that were shot by the RDK in the Bryansk region. Nikaitin had good relations with many high-profile, ultra-right wingers in Ukraine, including Semenyaka. He facilitated her ties with Italian and German neo-Nazis. She never tried to hide Nikaitin's involvement. In 2017, they visited a conference in Warsaw, organized by Polish white supremacy organizations Termosi Together. At that conference, Nikaitin portrayed Azov as Europe's only legal far-right paramilitary organization. Russian bloggers took an interest in him as well. In an interview with libertarian Mikhail Svetov in January 2023, Nikaitin discussed sabotage on Russian territory. He said the Ukrainian military leadership didn't resort to sabotage because it had a sense of honor and sought to defeat the enemy on the battlefield as gentlemen do. He argued there was no need for incursions. He also declared he had political ambitions in post-war Russia. In an interview with Russian journalist Oleg Koshin last November, Nikaitin said he may have felt sympathy for civilians in Russia, but most of them considered him a Nazi. I became an enemy as soon as the newspapers and the TV said so, he noted. He also stressed that he didn't shoot civilians. At the same time, he considered everybody expressing verbal support for the Russian army or who had even paid taxes as combatants. Kiev has denied its involvement in the RDK raid in the Bryansk region. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhail Podolyak called the event a classic provocation. Russia wants to scare its own people to give at least some justification to its aggression and growing poverty after a year of fighting, he said. Meanwhile, Nikaitin is apparently safe and sound, back in Ukraine. Which suggests he at least has the tacit approval of powerful people in the country. Nevertheless, he's unlikely to succeed in splitting Russian society, whether it be alone or in coordination with Ukraine's military leadership.
Who is India's national security advisor and why did Putin decide to meet him one-on-one? The Russian president has held a surprise meeting with A.K. Doval, PM Modi's most trusted foreign and domestic aide. The recent one-on-one meeting between India's National Security Advisor, NSA, Ajit Kumar Doval and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow underscored the growing stature of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's key resource for troubleshooting both back home and in key foreign capitals. Putin took some foreign policy experts by surprise by making time to meet with Doval, India's 5th NSA and a retired Intelligence Bureau, IB, chief. Their hour-long meeting took place on the sidelines of an Afghanistan conference, organized under the aegis of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Doval is only the second Indian NSA to have had an individual meeting with the Russian president. The first such meeting was the inaugural NSA Brajesh Mishra, back in 2001. Of all Indian high-ranking officials, only prime ministers have ever had direct meetings with Putin. Even the country's external affairs ministers have been excluded, including the incumbent Subrahmanyam Jaishankar. Doval's claim to fame. Doval retired as the IB chief in 2005, having only served in that capacity for 18 months, prior to the introduction of a compulsory 2-year tenure for the post. He then founded a nationalistic think tank, Vivekananda International Foundation, VIF. In 2014, he became NSA after Prime Minister Narendra Modi was elected. Soon after, Doval hit the headlines. In June that year, he negotiated the release of 46 Indian nurses who were trapped in a hospital in Tikrit, Iraq, which was reeling under an Islamic State, IS, onslaught. On July 5, 2014, the nurses were brought back to India. The success of the operation was among the first of his achievements as NSA, which marked his rise to power and influence. A lifelong counterinsurgent. Born in India's state of Uttarakhand, which was then part of the United Provinces in pre-independent India, Doval joined the Indian Police Service in 1968. He played a prominent role in anti-insurgency operations in Mizoram and Punjab throughout the late 1970s and 1980s. Doval was one of the key figures in gathering intelligence for Operation Blue Star to eliminate Khalistani, or Sikh, militancy in 1984. He went to Jammu and Kashmir, JNK, in 1990 and convinced hardline militants to become counterinsurgents, which set the stage for holding polls in the troubled border state in 1996. At the end of 1999, Doval, as additional director in the IB, was one of the 3 negotiators for the release of 155 passengers from Indian Airlines Flight 814, hijacked in Taliban-controlled Kandahar. The 7-day hostage drama was masterminded by Pakistani terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Doval accused Pakistan's inter-services intelligence of supporting the hijacking. Besides this incident, he has successfully resolved at least 14 other hijackings of Indian aircraft since 1971. Doval's meteoric rise. Doval is an ultranationalist with a subdued work style and a no-nonsense approach to what India perceives as security threats, and his threat perception is fully in line with the Modi government's. The imprint of Doval's strategic vision was in the public domain long before he became NSA. In a 2011 paper titled Internal Security, Need for Course Correction, Doval wrote, "The 26/11's terrorist action at Mumbai depicted a new order of lethality in Pakistan's unabated covert offensive against India. For almost 3 decades, India has passively accepted such provocations. It has failed to retaliate in a proactive manner that could raise costs for Pakistan and compel it to roll back its anti-India terrorist infrastructure. India ceded the strategic and tactical initiative to Pakistan some 3 decades ago and needs a course correction before it poses an existential threat." No wonder his views have resonated with those of Modi, who made him one of his key confidants in the Neighborhood Policy Watch, from Myanmar in the northeast to Pakistan and China at the western and northern frontiers, respectively, coupled with New Delhi's relentless fight against cross-border terrorism and internal security threats. Doval headed a successful military operation in Myanmar in 2015, along with the then Indian Army Chief General Dalbir Singh Suhag, against the proscribed National Socialist Council of Nagaland, NSCN, militants. India's recent cross-border attacks into Pakistani territory, the 2016 surgical strike on militants' launch pads and the 2019 airstrikes on alleged terrorist training camps, were conducted under Doval's supervision. He also helped end the Doklam standoff between Indian Defense Forces and China's People's Liberation Army in 2017. He is known to have spent 7 years in Pakistan gathering intelligence on active militant groups. India's most powerful bureaucrat. In October 2018, the Modi administration decided to revive the Strategic Policy Group, an agency tasked with advising the PM on matters of national security and strategic interest, with Doval as its chairman. The group was tasked with assisting the National Security Council in helping with a long-term strategic defense review. The move made Doval the most powerful bureaucrat in India since 1998 when the NSA post was created. The group has become the main mechanism for interministerial coordination in forming national security policies, and his uninterrupted access to the PM makes him much more powerful than many of the ministers in the Modi cabinet. In 2019, Doval was reappointed as NSA for 5 more years and given a cabinet rank in the second term of the Modi-led National Democratic Alliance government. Wooing foreign powers. In their book, Spy Stories, Inside the Secret World of the RAW and the ISI, British journalists Adrian Levy and Kathy Scott Clark describe how India's security infrastructure became more flexible and sensitive under Doval's watch. The perception game and narrative control became far more sophisticated, selling the story of India to foreign partners, they said. Under Doval, foreign powers traditionally suspicious of India were wooed. When to fight, and how to fight, and who would read about it were all indices in Doval's calculations, they added. It is estimated that the Doval doctrine has been a success in containing internal security challenges in J&K. The average lifespan of a hardened separatist after appearing on the Defense Forces radar has been reduced to only 4 to 12 weeks from an earlier estimate of 6 months to 2 years. A nationalist hawk with unbridled taste for power. Several columnists, defense analysts, and Doval's former colleagues have branded him a hawk. He has also been criticized for deliberately pushing hardline nationalism in tune with the policy of India's ruling right-wing Bharatiya Janata Party and the influence of which is being felt in its foreign policy. His statements on Pakistan and China, in particular, have been cited as India's muscular Hindutva narrative. Doval has also been called out for his vaulting ambition. Amarjit Singh Gilat, who headed India's espionage agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, RNAW, between 1999 and 2000, recently told The Wire in an interview that Ajit Doval is very good at sniffing power and yet, he tries to stay on the right side. He would stay on the right side. But I won't say that he doesn't have his preferences. That's why I said he has never possibly been happier in his career than he is today because he and Modi are just made for each other. He has often drawn flack from his detractors for his purported disregard for conflict management and alleged human rights violations. He has been accused of being quick on the draw in ordering the elimination of separatists posing internal security challenges in parts of India, including J&K, which has been a victim of cross-border terrorism by non-state actors from neighboring Pakistan. However, he has also found praise from unexpected quarters in high places. Pompeo's praise. Doval's prominent role in foreign policy was emphasized by former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In his book, Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love, he recalls Doval's general acceptance from Washington to Moscow. Pompeo, who was the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, director in the Trump administration from 2017 to 2018 and then served as the Secretary of State from 2018 to 2021, wrote, "On the Indian side, my original counterpart was not an important player on the Indian foreign policy team. Instead, I worked much more closely with NSA Ajit Doval, a close and trusted confidant of PM Narendra Modi." Unscripted diplomacy. Official information about the substance of Putin and Doval's conversation is mostly limited to generic statements that the two had wide-ranging discussions on bilateral and regional issues and agreed to continue work towards implementing the India-Russia Special and Privileged Strategic Partnership. It is significant, however, that the meeting came close on the heels of Doval's visits to Washington and London, which are leading the Western coalition to support Ukraine against Russia's military operation. It is believed that Doval and Putin's talks went beyond the strategic ties between Russia and India, as the NSA purportedly briefed the Russian leader about the mood in Washington and London, according to an official in the Ministry of External Affairs. India, while having no direct stake in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, has to tread the middle ground between its partnerships with Russia and the US, at the same time seeking a more prominent global role for itself as the leading voice of the global South. The rare one-on-one chat between the Russian president and one of New Delhi's most influential figures, coupled with the latter's preceding tour of the other camp in Washington, could be indicative of India's attempts to carve out recognition and influence that would come by playing a role in ending year-long conflict that has been rocking global politics. Russia, on the other hand, wants to maintain and further develop its partnerships after the sanctions and restrictions effectively cut it off from much of the Western markets. The Putin-Doval meeting, besides whatever its more practical implications may be, can be seen as a sign of special trust. As a former KGB officer, Putin may feel a greater degree of kinship with Doval, an added bonus to the sheer practicality of having a direct line with Modi's most trusted aide. Their surprise meeting indicates that both understand the importance of unscripted diplomacy at a time when the U.S. bid to solidify a unipolar world structure is being resisted by Moscow, Beijing, and the global South.